The drama surrounding the Indiana Fever's latest battle has ignited a firestorm of controversy, and it all centers on an incident that left players, coaches, and fans shaking their heads in disbelief. Already limping into Minnesota with half their roster out, the Fever endured a night where the injuries weren't the only obstacle. The referees themselves became part of the story, with a call so baffling, so backwards, that Caitlin Clark and her teammates could only respond with fury. It was the latest gut punch in a season that has turned into a war of attrition, a season where survival itself has become a storyline. To understand the magnitude of what happened, you have to begin with the context. Indiana came into this game against the Lynx already broken. Caitlin Clark had been sidelined with a groin injury, her presence missed for more than a month. Sophie Cunningham, a player who had added toughness and energy, was lost for the season with a torn MCL. Khloe Bby was shelved with knee issues. Sydney Coulson had torn her ACL. Arie MacDonald was out with a foot injury. That's 5 players gone, not just role players, but key contributors who formed the foundation of Indiana's system. The list reads like an injury report from a team cursed. A rotation gutted from top to bottom, leaving the Fever scrambling for bodies to even take the floor. Odyssey Sims, signed as a hardship replacement, limped onto the court despite not being anywhere close to healthy. She had no business playing, but what choice did she or Indiana really have? When you're down to scraps, you cling to whatever you can. Sims wasn't there at full strength. She was there simply because there was no one else. That was the level of desperation. If reading that list is exhausting, imagine trying to compete at the professional level under those circumstances. Indiana wasn't just undermanned. They were forced to ask players to carry workloads that no coach would ever design. By choice, take Lexie, for example. Just 2 nights earlier, she had been asked to play a career-high 37 minutes, logging 23 points in the process. That wasn't a luxury performance. That was survival. She didn't have the option of pacing herself or picking spots. She was thrown into the fire because there were no reinforcements waiting on the bench. Even head coach Stephanie White admitted that the team was barely holding things together. Her words carried a tone of honesty that felt unusual for a coach. In the middle of a playoff push, she spoke openly about how the physicality they were facing was more than this depleted roster could truly handle, that the spacing and instincts her team was forced to rely on weren't enough to mask the lack of chemistry. The patchwork roster, stitched together through hardship contracts, had no time to build trust. Players like Shea Petty, Odyssey Sims, and Aerial Powers were added midstream, handed major minutes without ever practicing with their teammates. That's not a strategy. That's damage control. Kelsey Mitchell did everything she could to hold the offense together, scoring 26 points and refusing to let the game turn into a blowout. She attacked, fought through traps, and kept Indiana alive for stretches when it looked like they might collapse. Her performance was nothing short of heroic, but the harsh truth was obvious. One player cannot fight every battle alone. Yet, as much as the injuries defined this night, they weren't the true breaking point. No, that came in the form of a whistle, or perhaps the lack of one, and a decision by the referees that left the Fever stunned. Lexie, already worn down by the minutes she had been forced to play, found herself on defense against Kayla McBride. McBride, battling for position, swung through with her elbow, and Hull caught it flush to the face. She went down hard, clutching her jaw, the pain and shock immediate. Anyone watching expected the whistle to go against McBride. This was textbook flagrant contact. Elbows to the face are not debatable. It's one of the clearest fouls in the rulebook. But then came the moment that turned frustration into outrage. Instead of penalizing McBride, the officials called the foul on Hull. The same player who had just been struck in the face, the one lying on the court in pain, was ruled the guilty party. The crowd gasped. Social media lit up. Even the broadcast. Announcers could barely hide their disbelief. The referees went to review the play, and fans hoped reason would prevail. The slow-motion replay left no doubt. The elbow was obvious, the contact undeniable. Yet instead of fully holding McBride accountable, the referees issued what felt like a half measure. They acknowledged something wrong had happened, but stopped, short of assigning blame where it clearly belonged. For Indiana, it wasn't just a bad call. It was confirmation that the deck was stacked against them. Caitlin Clark, sitting on the bench in street clothes, could only shake her head in disbelief. This wasn't the first time Indiana had seen calls like this go against them. Across the season, The Fever had developed a reputation in the eyes of fans and analysts for being the team that never seemed to get the benefit of the doubt. Every hard hit, every borderline shove, every questionable moment, the whistle rarely seemed to favor the Fever. Now, with Hull taking an elbow to the face and still being punished, that narrative only grew louder. Online, the anger exploded. Fans called it intentional, pointing to the swing of McBride's elbow as deliberate. Even if it wasn't, even if you gave her the benefit of the doubt, there was no justification for punishing Hull. Hit Lexie Hull with an elbow. Foul on Lexie Hull, one fan repeated online, the absurdity so glaring it felt like satire. This wasn't just a missed call. To Indiana, it symbolized something larger, that no matter how hard they fought, no matter how depleted they weren't just facing opponents, they were facing the referees too. And yet, despite the injustice, the Fever didn't fold. Kelsey Mitchell kept attacking, scoring again and again until she simply ran out of gas. Shea Petty, who had barely been introduced to her new teammates, stepped up with 16 points off the bench, looking like she had been with the team all season. Aaliyah Boston held down the paint, fighting off double teams and refusing to let Minnesota dominate the boards. Aerial Powers, another emergency addition, gave Indiana crucial minutes. Lexie Hull, despite the elbow, continued to fight, just as she had 2 nights earlier when she poured in 23 points in her marathon performance. It was a patchwork effort, a team stitched together out of desperation but held up by sheer will. Minnesota leaned into physical play, and Indiana refused to back down. But the difference in the whistle remained obvious. Stephanie White hinted at it post-game, her words carefully chosen but her meaning clear. The game was officiated differently depending on which team had the ball. Everyone watching could see it. The Fever fell, not because they lacked fight, but because they were stretched too thin, and because the officials tilted the balance just enough to make survival impossible. It was the latest chapter in what feels like a cursed season. A season where injuries and officiating bias collide to create an opponent bigger than any one team.